Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed is probably the most important book of Jewish philosophy ever written. It was written originally in Arabic under the title Dalalat al-Khairin, but it had its greatest impact by far in a Hebrew translation, especially that of Ibn Tibbon or Nevuchim. We have quite a few manuscripts of the Arabic original, but not too many commentaries written in Arabic to the Arabic original. And of the commentaries in Arabic that we possess, all but two come from the Yemen. Two exceptions are the commentary of Tabrizi on the 25 Principles of Natural Philosophy that is found at the beginning of part 2 of the guide, commentary which had a great influence on Chastai Kreskas, and a very badly preserved set of marginal notes in a manuscript at St. Petersburg in Judaeo-Arabic, from which very little may be recovered. All the other commentaries in Arabic to the Arabic original come from the Yemen. And in this video, we're going to look at the three most important of these. Now, the first of these is found in the margins to a copy of the guide in Arabic letters, found in a huge codex of some 400 folios found in Istanbul under the shelf mark Cirilla 1279, first studied in the 1950s by Franz Rosenthal, who published this note you see on the screen in the Journal of the American Oriental Society, a short note by which he presents a great deal of information about the book, the codex, the copyist, and many of the books that are cited, particularly in the dense notes that accompany the guide. We'll have a look at them in a minute. The copyist is a certain Muhammad bin Hassan al-Ni'mi. Not much is known about him. Rosenthal did dig up quite a few facts and copied it in Saada, one of the cities in Yemen, and the copy was made over the course of 3 years, not surprising since there's so much material in this manuscript, not only a full copy of Maimonides' guide transcribed from Hebrew letters into Arabic with dense notes, but many other philosophical and scientific texts, including, by the way, a few of the products of the Jews of Yemen philosophical essays, which survive only in this manuscript. About several years ago, together with Almo Kashir, then my research assistant, now a lecturer in the Department of Arabic at Bar Ilan, published a selection of notes that Ni'mi wrote to the guide. As I said, they're in the margins. You'll see a picture of how it looks in a second. You can see here actually the two margins, the three margins above, to the side, and below, with these dense notes. We'll see a close-up in a minute. But we published a short note in which we extracted all that we could identify at the time, critical notes of Ni'mi. I should point out that Ni'mi's commentary is not a commentary in the usual sense of the word. Usually we consider a commentary as a book that is written to ease the reader into understanding a certain book, or help the reader, or have the reader read the book the way the commentator would like you to read it. The commentator helps by explaining difficult, rare words, clarifying what may be obscure expressions, identifying sources for quotations, and so on and so forth. This is not what Ni'mi does. His notes are more like the kind of comments you find in comments to YouTube videos or talkback on blog posts, where he's simply, reacting to things that he reads in the guide, either critically or, having some excursus. It's not a commentary in the usual sense. As I said, here you can see an opening of the manuscript with these dense notes. You notice also that the manuscript is damaged towards the top, and this damage gets worse as we move along. Just from the beginning of the guide, it gets worse, and the notes become harder to decipher. With digital imagery, one can magnify it and have a much better shot at understanding what's written there, or deciphering the script. But as you can see here, still quite a few words at the end of the line are sort of rubbed out, and overall it's an extremely challenging task to decipher this. You notice here among the Arabic words in the margin, you see things that look a little different. That's right, that's Hebrew. This man was able to read the Hebrew alphabet. I don't know if he understood the Hebrew language. And as I said, he transcribed the entire guide from Hebrew letters, as well as some other short treatises by Yemeni authors. And in the margins of his copy, he also put a few notes, or copied out a few words for whatever reason. Now here you have one example of the critical note, of the type of critical note that Naomi writes. He's a very well-read person who's read through all the branches of wisdom literature, and he's not impressed, certainly not by Maimonides. He says here, "Know, noble brother, that I have examined books of writers, and I have searched for their secrets, philosophers, Kalam people, Sufis, and others, new and old. Every author praises his topic and ascribes to his book sublime and magnanimous worth. He chooses it for its stunning titles and presents it as fitting for honorable practice and an upright way of life. Such is the case with the author of this book, who called it Guide for the Perplexed. The perplexed individual thereby invests his heart in it. His parched soul hopes to quench a thirst from the source, but after great exertion and effort, the clouds scatter without bringing rain, and he awakens from useless dreams. As the poet said, they are on a night journey. They have not yet departed, but they are already exhausted." Well, despite this disappointment, Naomi certainly found enough interest in the guide to copy out the entire book, including writing out in Arabic letters the verses from the Bible, which Maimonides cites in Hebrew, and writing these dense notes throughout. Not all the pages have these notes, but there are quite a few, and it'd be a worthwhile, though difficult project to try and decipher them all. I hope to get back and make a little more progress, but it's a huge effort, and someone ought to do it. Okay, so much for Naomi. And now we're moving on to the second of the commentaries that we're talking about, written by Yahya bin Suleiman, better known among the Yemenites by his Hebrew name Zechariah Harofei, a medical writer, presumably a medical doctor. Flourished in the first half of the 15th century, which is actually where most of our philosophical 15th century is the time where we have the greatest amount of philosophical writing among Jews and a great deal among Muslims as well, as we saw the Naomi. He wrote many things, including a philosophical midrash on the Torah, a commentary on Song of Songs, Shir Shirim, and a commentary on the guide, which is found in about half a dozen manuscripts, and went through at least 3 versions, something which I can't go into here in detail, but in the paper which I published in the volume edited by Carlos Frankel on traditions of Maimonideanism, this paper here, Sharh Dalala, I take up the different versions and the differences between them and what they may mean for his evolution and the type of resistance he may have met in the Yemen, as well as a number of other things. I won't be going into those things in detail here. Instead, I'll be taking a look at 2 things. First of all, the close reading of the opening lines of the guide. And this is something which is a feature of the third commentary as well. You see, in a book which is so laden with meaning, and which the author has such an elusive, evasive style of writing, one has to, look for any hint one can grab. And the assumption, I think, of many of the Yemenite readers was that the hints for the proper understanding of the guide are found in the opening lines, even though these lines are not, strictly speaking, part of the book, and not even part of the introduction to the book. They're part of a personal letter on the face of it that Maimonides has written to his prized pupil, Yosef ben Yehuda, explaining how he got to know him and why he felt that Yosef ben Yehuda was the person who was worthy of having the secrets that Maimonides wishes or agrees to reveal in the guide revealed to him. It's when the great scholar David Bannett published a little booklet of Maimonides' correspondence, he included this because, formally speaking, it's a risala, it's a letter. But Bannett himself said that this is really not quite kosher to do this, because even though it's formally presented as a personal letter to Yosef ben Yehuda, it's actually an integral part of the guide. And as I'm trying to get across here, it's not just an integral part of the guide, but in the views of the Yemenites, and I think myself in other ways, which I've written about, it is really crucial for understanding the intended readership of the guide, which is in a way exclusivist, insofar as that certain people should get hints from these lines that the guide is not meant for them. But we won't go into that now. We'll just look at a few features, including one, which we'll look at immediately, which can only be done by someone reading the Arabic original and commenting upon it, because the word that he's trying to squeeze meaning out of is an auxiliary verb and is really not translated. There's no presence in the translations. The very first words of this letter, which is put at the front of the guide, are, as you see here, Kunta Ayua al-Talmid al-Aziz. Kunta Ayua al-Talmid al-Aziz, which is translated by Pina's "my honored pupil." It's not really a literal translation, because, as I said, I'll get this in a minute, this is a sentence in which kunta is an auxiliary verb. Penis is, I think, it translated it correctly, but it doesn't get across the impact of this verb, which the Yemenites will take apart. And then he comments in Arabic, Kila innahu da lahu in Allah yukawinahu. Some say that he prayed that God bring him into being, or fashion him, or make him into something. Now, the first word of this epistle, the dedicatory epistle, it's an auxiliary verb, and it's untranslatable. But the Yemeni commentator found it laden with meaning, especially as it is formed from the root which means to be. Kana yakunu means to be. In the Quran, when God creates the universe, he does it by using the imperative kun, and kaun is a word not as laden perhaps as wujud, but an important word in the philosophical vocabulary of the time. And therefore, from the opening words, the commentator has squeezed out that the purpose of the guide is to help transform the student into someone who truly is. Allah yukawinahu. Now, particularly with regard to the first comment on kunta, a perfect verb in Arabic can be understood as a prayer, as one would say, Al-Tala Allah umrahu. It's a perfect form, which means God has lengthened his life, but it's actually a prayer, may God lengthen his life. So this is perfectly kosher from the point of view of grammar. And the Yemenites see both of these phrases as having important prayers, the two most important prayers that one can make on behalf of an individual. The first one being a prayer that he becomes something, he makes something of himself, or that God help him make something of himself. And the second is that he deserve the afterlife, as understood by the Yemenite philosophers in their understanding of Maimonides, which is, as you see here on the slide, the endurance of his soul together with its items of knowledge. What survives after death is basically the intellectual knowledge that one has assimilated to oneself, and because it's intellectual, because it's pure intellect, because it's pure abstraction, it has no real binding to the body, and so when the body dies, it lives on. But the Yemenites add that it consists in its binding to Aravot. Aravot is, according to what the Talmud says in Chagiga, and as the Yemenites understood it, a name for what the medievals thought to be the outer limits of the material universe. You may know that in cosmology, there are ongoing debates as to whether the universe is infinite or finite, whether it has a bound or it's unbounded. The medieval conception was that the universe was bound, it's finite, it has the shape of a sphere, and beyond the outermost sphere, it's a meaningless question to ask, what is there? The outermost sphere is the sphere which is responsible for imparting the daily motion and all the other motions of the universe. The daily motion has the entire cosmos in the medieval conception, making one huge circuit in 24 hours. So from this point of view, this was a massive amount of energy which then dissipates down on towards the earth. And the Talmud says that the Aravot is a place from which the souls issue, and so the Yemenites thought that this is a place to which the souls of those who merited return. Now, the other aspect of this commentary that I want to talk about consists in Zechariah's rewriting chapters, particularly with regard to the chapters of the first section of the guide, where Maimonides talks about these equivocal terms, these Hebrew words that have multiple meanings, and Maimonides does this to show how when these words are used in a way that seems to impart materiality to the deity in a form of anthropomorphism, they can be taken in a figurative sense, and Maimonides has an important part of his task to show that this is legitimate. It's not simply something that he's forced to do because he's imposing his philosophical ideas on the text of the Bible, but rather the Hebrew lexicography, the Hebrew language it gives these words, imparts to these words ab initio, one can almost say, this range of meaning, and therefore he's simply pulling out the appropriate meaning of the many meanings that the word has in order to avoid ascribing to God some materiality. According to Zechariah and the Yemenites, this is all introductory. This is philosophy 101. There's no need to go into it, and so they quite literally, as we'll see, pick up where Maimonides left off. For example, Guide Part 1, Chapter 39, which discusses the equivocal term lave, meaning heart. Now here we have in the translation Professor Penis, heart is an equivocal term denoting the part of the body in which resides the principle of life. The term is used figuratively to designate the middle of everything. It is also a term denoting thought, also a term signifying opinion. It is also a term denoting will. It is also a term denoting the intellect. So in the long list of alsos, after giving the primary meaning, which is this bodily organ, this muscle, which pumps our blood, Maimonides, after this long list of also meanings, comes to intellect. But for the Yemenites, intellect is the what philosophy is all about in a way. And the whole purpose of the guide and its attempt to get rid of people having wrong ideas about the deity and ascribing to the deity materiality in one form or another, is to show that all things divine are basically intellect, being abstract, permanent being. And therefore, they pick up where he left off. And Zechariah simply rewrites the chapter. He doesn't comment and cite the passage and expound on it or expand on it. He simply rewrites the chapter saying, Lev, it's one of the names for intellect. That's the only meaning that's of interest to him. Then he goes on from the meaning, the primary meaning, which in his view is intellect, to give it other metaphorical uses, quite a few. Used metaphorically for will and providence, lirada walinaya, as in my heart, and my heart will be there, a verse which speaks about the temple in Jerusalem. Faculties and purpose, al kuwa wal as in who will do according to what is in my heart and my soul, which speaks of the priest in the tabernacle. So the temple, the tabernacle, the priests are all here highlighted, and it is also used metaphorically for overpowering and capability, as in order to recapture the hearts of the people of Israel. So Zechariah is basically rewriting this chapter, taking Maimonides' last in the list of all souls, intellect, as really the only meaning of interest, and expanding that further. And now finally, the third commentary, the one which I'm now engaged in producing an edition, translation, simultaneously translating it into both English and Hebrew with notes to the best of my ability. It's anonymous, and it's found in two manuscripts, one in Berlin and one in London. Now, here you see a picture of the opening, the first opening from the copy in Berlin. And what I want you to notice is how clean it is. It's sort of a professional copy. It has a heading, B'Shem Hashem El Olam, sort of the Jewish basmala, which the copyist has put in, and as the opening verses. So this is a sort of accomplished formal commentary, and we have quite a few of them. As you know, most of the commentaries of the guide exist in this form, not necessarily in the margins as they're printed, but as separate texts. Now, this commentary, because it's found in a manuscript in Berlin, I guess, was noticed by some scholars at the very beginning of the 20th century, working in Strasbourg, or as it was called then, Strasbourg, and two people, Zobel and Horn, each put out a small section, which they published. They copied out the text in the Berlin manuscript and wrote some notes. And Zobel also translated the commentary into German with additional notes, as you can see here, just 20 chapters from the first part. This work has been pretty much forgotten. Now, some years ago, while cataloging manuscripts, and I made an effort to go through all the copies of the guide in Judaeo-Arabic, I came across this manuscript in London with very dense marginal notes. And when I looked at the notes, I noticed that they were, at least for the most part, identical with those in the Berlin manuscript. You can see here, close up, again, it reminds us perhaps of the Gerala manuscript, though they're actually much clearer. You see notes on both sides of the margins, and you can even see them interlinearly here between the lines. So it's still takes some work to decipher them, but actually it's, except for the words that are lost in where the margins have been bound, it's really not that hard to figure out. Now, the big question is what is the relationship between these two manuscripts. When I first identified the notes in the London manuscript as being the same for the most part with those in the Berlin manuscript, I thought that I'd come across a perfect example of the way commentaries come into being. Someone reads a book, and as he's reading, jots notes into the margins as seems appropriate, and later on copies them out into a formal, a separate treatise, edits them, polishes them up, maybe takes out things, puts out things, corrects some things, but basically it's the transformation of marginal notes into an independent treatise, which is a commentary. And I had at first thought this was what we had here. But upon close inspection, it turns out that the relationship between the two manuscripts is far more complex, that not only are there many notes in London that are not in Berlin, but as it stands now, it looks like it may have gone the other way, that there was some other copy, the proverbial Vorlage of them both, and someone had actually copied notes from that commentary as well as other commentaries, including Zechariah's, into the margins of this unusual copy of Maimonides' guide. Now I have time just to look at one comment from this huge work, and I've chosen one which again addresses the opening lines of the guide, that is the opening lines of the letter addressed to Maimonides' pupil, which is placed at the beginning of the guide. And I call attention to a mistaken anticipation, something that one would not expect of someone who's a native speaker of Arabic to make. But we all come to books with anticipations. I've pointed out a huge error that persisted this day that was made by Ibn Tibbon because of a mistaken anticipation of his own. And here we have an anticipation of a different sort. Because in the opening lines, as I said earlier, one expects Maimonides to say straight away the key features, the key characteristics of his pupil that led him to decide that here, this is the person whom I reveal secrets they really shouldn't be revealed to hardly anyone. It had to have something to do with the intellectual prowess of that person, because that's what it's all about from the point of view of these Yemeni philosophers. And therefore, when Maimonides says, Lama, I'm reading here from the Arabic at top, Lama ra'aytuhu fi ash'arika. I'm reading it as most people read it, and as it's correctly read. Maimonides is saying that I've seen your poems, but this reader can't make sense that Maimonides is choosing this Yosef ben Yehuda to have the secrets revealed to him because he's a poet. It has to be because of his intellectual capabilities, and therefore he read this Lama ra'aytu fi ish'arika min shiddat al-ishtiyak l'talab l'lubur nadariya. All right, in English here, because of what I observed in the inspiration, not in your poems, but the inspiration of your powerful longing for inquiry into speculative matters. And just to be sure that this is how he read it, you see here in the below the citation from the Judaeo-Arabic, the comment, the gloss, Ma'na qawlihi ish'arika yani bi quwwat al-hats wa su'ur fil ma'ani ba'isa talwich, which I translate here at the bottom. He intends by saying your inspiration is power of intuition and discernment of ideas by means of the slightest hint. Now, penis has translated because of what I observed in your poems of your powerful longing for speculative matters. This is clearly correct. And as a matter of fact, now we know that we have actually some of the poems written by Yosef ben Yehuda. But the Yemenites didn't know about the historical Yosef ben Yehuda or about his poems, and I'm sure they would have cared all that much about that. This man was quite sure that the characteristic which led Maimonides to decide that Joseph Yehuda is the person in whom he can confide these secrets, are his genius. And therefore, although all readers of the guide that I know of outside of the Yemen vocalized the word Ash'atika and then understood it to mean your poems, the Yemeni reader took it to be a masdar of the form of the root sha'ara in the fourth form, which means to inspire with. Sorry if there are a few typos in this slide, but if you've been with me till now, kol hakavod lachem, I really appreciate it, and I hope that you found something useful in this video. And if you have any comments or any questions, if you want more bibliography, just put in a note. Thank you very much.